Break the echo chamber with inclusive research. My name is Marianthi. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a senior user researcher currently working in the healthcare sector, and I help create services that put people first. So today we have quite a few things to cover. I'll start by defining a little bit what inclusive design might mean and why it matters, about our unconscious biases as UCD people, researchers, designers, how we can do inclusive recruitment, some accessible research methods, and how we minimize our biases during the analysis and synthesis. And very important bit, how do we secure senior stakeholder support? Hopefully you're gonna walk away with some practical key takeaways. So there are different definitions out there about what inclusion means, inclusive design, even the word, is this the right word? But I quite like this quote by Kat Holmes. And she says, the best way to identify inclusion is to start with recognizing exclusion. So I have found this to be the easiest way to start with inclusive research or inclusive design. Just ask ourselves, just ask our teams, who are we excluding with this research? Who are we excluding with this design? And just start the conversation this way. So when we speak about inclusive design, there are a few elements in there. So we're talking about usability, we're talking about accessibility, ethics, and equity. So although there's no time to dive deep into each of those areas, I'm going to touch on the equity bit and also the accessibility. So I quite like Tony Ruth's equity series. There are some nice illustrations that I have found work really well to explain some of the concepts. So I will call the little person on the left red and the one on the right blue. And in the middle you can see the tree. The tree represents the system. So inequality is about unequal access to opportunities. As you can see, the way the tree is made just naturally gives more opportunities, apples in this case, to red, whereas for blue is much harder. And then if we go to what equality means, then as you can see, both red and blue have some ladders there that they can climb and hopefully reach easier those apples. But again, because of the way the system is, still, red has many more opportunities. And then it's the equity bit that we saw on the previous slide when we think about inclusive design. And this is, as you can see, blue in this case has a higher ladder, so we provide customized tools so both parties can have access to these opportunities. And further to that is what we call justice. And justice is actually fixing the system. So as you can see, by fixing the systems and also giving the right tools to people, then this is where both parties are reaching the right opportunities. So I have found this a quite nice illustration to just explain some of these concepts. Another thing I would like to touch on quickly is, we hear sometimes interchangeably use the word diversity and inclusion. So there's another quote that I like from Verna Myers, and it says, diversity is being invited to the party. It gives a metaphor, actually. So diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. So I like that. So the first step is diversity. Create diverse teams, have diverse participants. But when things really start to shift is when the word participation comes in, and this is the being asked to dance. And I wanted to give you an example of how sometimes our systems are built in ways that are exclusive. And This is an example from an algorithmic photo checker. So this person wanted to renew their passport. I believe it was from New Zealand. And a few years back, they tried to upload their picture online just to renew the passport, and they kept receiving this error. And the error says subject eyes are closed, which obviously they're not. And as you can see, this situation could be easily avoidable if the research that went to this technology had included even a very small but significant number of people of different descents. So the algorithm wouldn't have learned to produce this error message. And again, when I show you this initial diagram with the bubbles, there was accessibility in there. And this is a huge topic, and sometimes, again, people might use it interchangeably with inclusive design, but inclusive design touches on the other elements as well. So from one of the latest statistics from the Family Resources Survey in 2022, in the UK, there are 60 million people that have a disability. And you can see how it's rising from 2002 up to the point that the survey was done. And then 11% of this are children, 23 working age people, and 45% state pension age. So you understand, like, the numbers are so high that it's impossible to not take them into account. And if you add to that, so these are, let's say, the permanent access needs or disabilities, and then we have the temporary and the situational. So just to give an example, for the touch bit, you might have one arm, but you might have an arm injury, which is like temporary, or you might be a new parent just carrying a kid, and again, you only have available one hand. So if you add these numbers as well, you understand, like, for what numbers we're speaking, what percentages of the audiences. And just to give an example, there is this concept of if you solve for one that is excluded, then you can extend to many. So not only this specific user group will benefit, but also other user groups will. So in this case, if we take the hearing, with closed caption on videos, deaf people will benefit, but also someone with an ear infection, which is temporary, or people hard of hearing, or people in noisy environments, like, for example, in this example, it was a bartender, but also like people like me, like non-native speakers that have English as an additional language. So again, you can see you start solving an issue, but this extends to so many more segments. And of course, accessibility, we have to think about the law as well, because we have the Equality Act, which focuses on the 9 protected characteristics to consider as a starting point to ensure we test our services with a diverse cohort of participants, but also future users. And these characteristics are age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion or belief, sex or gender, sexual orientation, pregnancy and maternity, marriage and civil partnership. But there are other characteristics to consider as well. And it might be different for your audiences or for your products, but some things to consider is people who have limited or no access to the internet or digital technologies, people that lack the skills or the confidence to use digital technologies, people with low income, those that have different cultural values or beliefs, having different learning styles, speak English as an additional language. And I wanted to share these statistics from a recent digital poverty report from Deloitte. And it says 13 to 19 million people aged 16 plus in the UK are estimated to be in digital poverty. That's a very big number. And if any of you are working in the digital space, if you create solutions digitally, may I ask how many people work in the digital realm? Yeah, almost everyone. So I think this is something that we tend to forget, and this cannot be ignored. We are talking about a huge number of people. So especially if any of you are in the healthcare or in the public sector offering services, then this has to be a priority, because for those services that have to do with our health, it's crucial to have solutions, offline solutions, from the outset. So not a nice to have, but from the outset. So where do we begin? So a good place to begin is our own biases. So the way that our brains work and the way that our brains are, they are made to just exclude information, make sense of information, and the way to do that is to have biases. So we all have them. The bit, so we cannot control that bit. What we can control is being aware of our biases. I would say start with recognizing them. So once we accept that we've all got biases, then we can be real and honest about them. So there are some good sources I have found through the years. So Harvard has the assessments that they take a few minutes to go through, and they just show you where your unconscious biases are. And I try to take those tests like every year if I can. And you know, it's mind-blowing. But it's a very good place to just see how your mind, so you might think it's like, I don't have any biases. And then these tests are a nice starting point, because it's pretty humbling, because you might discover that you might have some biases. And another website I quite like, it's called Decision Lab, and it has a list of biases, maybe 100 plus, and it gives you examples of what this bias means, how to avoid them, and very nice, nice examples. So I would recommend that as well. The other thing is to collectively, with your stakeholders, make a list of these biases, assumptions. So before you go out to a project, everyone has assumptions about what we're going to find out. So just list them out, and again, being honest with what we think we know. So that's another one that I have found really helpful. Research lived experiences before speaking to people. So doing the preparation is not only very helpful and useful, but it's also very respectful to the people that you're going to speak to. So do some desk research, speak to some people in your team or networks that might have lived experiences, or just they might know someone with lived experience. So just expose yourself initially in this way. We have to discuss about how do we make it easier for people to contribute to our research. So thinking about recruitment, a good place to start is map your audience and see who might be excluded. So again, if we go back to this first slide, just asking the question, are we excluding anyone? Who are we excluding? And then also, it's good to remember that people don't fit in just one box. And this is what we call intersectionality. So this can make things and experience much more complicated. So if I give an example from healthcare, let's imagine a young woman from a non-British culture who doesn't speak English well and wants to seek, let's say, oral contraception for the first time. So the issue is already sensitive. So if you see the complexes of every new layer that comes in, not speaking English very well, coming from a culture that is slightly different, these topics might be more sensitive, then if they don't receive the right information, they cannot make the right choices for their health. So they are led to exclusion. So you can understand when we put different of this, like different layers of these different characteristics, the experiences might worsen very quickly. So it's nice to keep that in mind. And another thing I think we forget sometimes, because we work with constraints, we work with time limits, budget limits, is to build relationships with groups, especially if you're going to the underserved communities or seldom heard voices. It takes time to get their trust. It takes time to build these relationships. Sometimes we just grab and go. Just go, find the findings, do the changes, and we forget. Just make the effort to build these relationships. Also, there are some amazing organizations out there and charities that are advocates for all sorts of different groups of people. So getting to know these charities, these organizations, if they have researchers or designers that you can build your networks with, and it's a great source for recruitment as well. So that's another thing that I have found useful through the years. And also you can build trust by going where your users are. The last few years, it has been a lot about online interviews, so we got used to this. But we have to think again and ask the question, who are we excluding this way? So in order to build this trust with the communities, you have to go where they are or begin with there. So it's like, how do we get acquainted again with going out, with going where these people might be? It can be just understanding what is the context. It's a good idea to offer choice on location, and also run some sessions outside of the 9 to 5. So a lot of people are working 9 to 5. It will depend on your audience, but it's a good idea to try and give some slots before 9, after 5, so make sure that we give the opportunity to people to just come and speak to us. Just remember that as UCD people, as researchers, as designers, we've got power. Sometimes we forget that because, we have to deal with so many things. But ultimately, we have the power to decide which users we put at the center of our designs, of our research. So just remember that we've got this power. We are this person in our team or in our organization that can have a say on that. And now I'm going to speak about some methods that we can use to enable participation, so this dancing where you come to the party bit, how we can open it up to a range of users by being flexible with our methods. Remote sessions can support reaching geographically excluded users, users with certain disabilities, and we should give alternative options for digitally excluded individuals. So there are people that are not comfortable using Zoom or MS Teams or whatever we use to do this interview. So just offer different ways to meet and talk to them. And guerrilla research, third-party recruitment platforms are nice and convenient, but again, remember to ask yourself who is being excluded in the process, because in these platforms normally there are people that might be have access, first of all, to the internet and to digital devices. So again, just asking the question, that's fine, and if we have limited time, sometimes we will do that. But it's good to just keep note of the, who we are excluding in the process. Sometimes it's really useful to have a paper consent form, or if you're interviewing with someone that doesn't speak the language that you're interviewing in well, then having the translated consent form. In this case, you would need the translator as well. and also allow people to bring someone with them if that's what makes them feel more comfortable. And this applies in different scenarios. So again, you have to think about your audiences, but that's an idea that might help someone feel at ease and having these more meaningful interviews, conversations. And as I said, just again, offer choice on location. And I'm emphasizing this because again, I think, and I'm speaking for myself first, we got used to this online, everything online. So maybe it's just like asking ourselves, when do we need to change that, in what circumstances, and just like start slowly doing this as well. The last bit in here is sometimes it's easier to offer, it's vouchers, whatever that is. Just is a good idea to ask your users how they would like to be compensated. And if you can make some changes and accommodate that, this always, again, builds trust. So it's a good thing to think about, like just understand what your users, the people that are going to use your service prefer. And some things to think about during your research. Ensure that the participants are able to navigate and access the place the research is happening. So let's say if it's a usability lab, or you have arranged a specific location to meet. So recently what happened to a colleague of mine, they had set up an interview in the lab. It was someone with access needs, and the person just assumed that they can park in the office, and they came to the office and there was no parking. And as you understand, this can create a lot of stress on the day to the person that just thought they could come and park, and now they had to just like move around the city to find a parking place. For the researcher, for the research team, they got really stressed that they couldn't help in this way they didn't know. So just try to avoid all the stress, and it's good practice to just maybe send all the different amenities that you have in the place that you're meeting, and just be very clear as you can be. So to like visit the place in advance, just to know how it is, just to make sure that you cover as many scenarios as possible, so that you make it easier for them, easier for yourself. Be considerate during the session. Sometimes things are far from ideal. Even if it's on a call, there might be noise, there might be carrying responsibilities. English is an additional language. Sometimes, people might take more time to just express themselves. So just keep that in mind. And also allocate more time, especially when you know that there's going to be some needs or adjustments. For example, if there is a translator, always allow more time, assistive technology. Just give this buffer to yourself before, so that you can set up and everyone feels comfortable, and also afterwards. And I would really like to emphasize that, no one gets this perfect. No one is inclusive all the time. So just be kind and patient with yourself, and it's okay to make mistakes. And I like this concept of being in your learning zone and then in the action zone. So be in your learning zone, learn as much as you can, but learning never stops. So don't just wait until you've got all the right words, all the right methods. Just be prepared enough, go to action. We will make mistakes, and then go back, educate yourself again, repair if you need to, and then go back. So sometimes it feels quite comfortable, scary to just go out and start doing this type of research. So I would encourage you to just start and then just move between those two zones. And after the research, and this is a good practice for every research, is to just send an email to thank the participant, give them the opportunity to send any other remaining thoughts. Sometimes you will be surprised, like, from the quotes you might get during these emails, but this also builds this trust. So you show them, you value them, you want to give them the opportunity to just like add anything, because sometimes you might have forgotten something and then it might have been quite an important insight. Also get back to people to let them know how their contribution has made a difference. Or if it takes too much time, for example, if you're in large organizations and things are moving slowly, let them know as well, so that they understand that it's not that you haven't shared your insights, but just explain things might take time. So again, it's this honesty. At the end of the research session, just acknowledge who has been excluded. So going back to the beginning where you have mapped your audiences, just go and say, okay, this time we only spoke to our super users, for example. But then next time we have to make a more conscious effort to go out to these other groups. So again, it's about this being honest as a team. And you might say, all sounds good, Marianthi, but how do we do all this when we have tight budgets, we have tight time frames, competing priorities? I would say if there is an answer, the answer is to make any lasting change, then you need stakeholders on board. So you can start with the most obvious advocates, the one that you can see cheer you up, and start there, but then extend to the more skeptical ones. So when it comes to stakeholders, some things to consider. The whole product team. So it takes a village to believe that, and expect that our user base needs to be formed by a diverse group. Also be aware of groups of people who are responsible for procuring and directing the research studies, and build connections with these people, and involve them in your research. Involve all the stakeholders, invite them over to your interviews, share examples, just keep it alive and highlight user quotes. That's a nice way to just keep sharing what you're finding out. I will give a recent example, so from a team away day that we had recently, and there were some senior leaders there. So the product manager and I decided to set up a DIY empathy lab. So we used some laptops, paper, safety glasses, tape, and gloves to simulate certain conditions as like arthritis, extreme zoom in for people that need to do that, and then we tried to simulate cataract with the safety glasses, and just gave some tasks to our senior stakeholders that they tried to complete, and that's how they had this experience of how hard it can be to use certain pages and doing specific tasks. And they were really struck by the complexities, and they agreed that we should do more things to make it easier and accessible. So we got buy-in to do accessibility audit in that case, and also to research with participants with various access needs. So you don't need much. Start where you are. I'm going to skip that because we have a few minutes left. Some practical tips. Take on the stakeholders' mindset and speak their language. They're sort of our users as well. So instead of just assuming they understand what we're talking about, just trying to understand what they are interested in, and then show the value of your work this way. And from a business perspective, it just makes sense, because if more people are able to use the product, then more people will use the product. And try to measure the impact of your work. And retrofitting for inclusion and accessibility always costs more, and sometimes it's impossible as well. And non-inclusive services can lead to fines or lawsuits. In the States, this is really big. And the other thing is that people will use our products in ways we have never imagined, and we know that very well now. I want to share a few tools that I have found useful, maybe a way to start. Intersectionality cards is a very good one, where you have different point of views and questions to think about as a team. It's the tarot cards of tech. Again, a really good one. It has some extreme scenarios you can think about, but also it has non-human sort of personas. For example, Mother Nature. What would nature say? What is the say that they have in this design? So that's a good one. And then the cards for humanity, just pairing up different conditions, and just you can start the conversation with your teams. In this case, it was Lucia, 55, always upbeat, and is blind. So it gives you different scenarios so that you can do some crash testing on your designs. So to wrap up, for service teams, be conscious of your biases. Plan for digital exclusion. Iterate any design in order to identify and address biases over time. So it's a little bit like brushing your teeth. You cannot just brush your teeth tonight and then not brush them again. It's like an ongoing process. So it takes this commitment. And we are the advocates in our organizations, in our teams. Advocate for inclusive design, create this awareness. And then when it comes to impact, inclusive design should be considered from the outset because it's beneficial from a business point of view. And also, don't forget to showcase your studies, what you have achieved, what impact it had. You can build this story, you can do the storytelling and take more people with you each time you produce your work. And specific to leaders, have training for inclusion for all employees, so everyone shares knowledge and there is a standard, shares standard. Diversify the groups of people who are responsible for procuring and directing. This naturally makes things more inclusive. Encourage diversity and inclusivity in the design team. And inclusion is not a project, it's not a one-off. There's no perfect way of doing it. We're all learning, but it's a journey. So just be kind to yourself, be brave, and continue building your knowledge as you go. I think I'm at time, so I won't take any questions now, but I'm more than happy to talk to you afterwards, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you.